Hello and welcome to another episode of the Reloop Brief. I'm Barry Snedden. Now, in this episode, Shraddha Kumar continues her conversation with Emily Alfred from the Toronto Environmental Alliance. We're looking at what major events can teach us about reuse in practice, including what's worked, what still needs to improve, and how early adopters can help build the case for reuse at larger scale. Let's rejoin the conversation.
You had the opportunity to actually visit the stadium. I had the opportunity to go to the fan festival. We had some curious takeaways. For example, one of the things that I saw happening was while we were entering the fan festival, they do allow you to carry a plastic bottle that can be reused inside, but they ask you to take off the labels, which was curious.
Yeah, the label removing thing was pretty interesting. I'm really curious to know if that's happening in other jurisdictions as well. If that could be a misinterpretation by people who are very concerned about their responsibility to protect brand sponsors and names, because FIFA is very protective of its sponsors and its brand. So yeah. I'm curious whether that was actually directed by them or just an interpretation of local security staff. Yeah, walking into the event, and at the stadium, there were souvenir cups everywhere. So there was like special FIFA edition Coca-Cola souvenir cups. There were special souvenir Michelob, the beer sponsor souvenir cups. Everything else was served either in the can or in single-use, special branded, disposable aluminum cups. There were some single-use plastic cups. There was just a lot of cups and things everywhere. A lot of water bottles everywhere.
I have to say that, well, I did have the same observations at the fan festival as well. I did notice that barely any of these containers were littered. So I want to give a shout out to
the recycling ninjas, because they were so on it every few minutes. Like, they had a simple organics recyclable garbage sort of setup. However, there were recycling ninjas, as they were called, constantly going in, emptying the bags, searching for what needs to be grouped where, sorting at that spot, and then taking it back to another station to sort it even more perfectly. So
I'd have to say, the city's leadership on this one is a real win. So it may not seem like a big deal, but waste and recycling regulations for the non-residential sector are so murky and so arbitrary, and they're not really enforced. So some places don't have recycling really. Some places don't really do a great job. Most commercial buildings, and definitely not the stadium, did not have organics collection before. But the city said one legacy is that we are going to make sure that there's garbage recycling and organics throughout the stadium, fan zone, and like the last mile precinct from sort of getting people there, which they did. Same colors, same bins, same pictures throughout everywhere that fans are going. So I think they pushed for that, they got it, and then they also said that, we need additional sorting support to make sure that we're on top of waste. So I think that's great. I'm really impressed by that. And I think that's a legacy that's not related to reuse, but it is related to better waste management and actually paying attention to those details and not just blaming tourists, visitors, fans, kids who are dropping things in a bin because they want to run and watch the game, blaming them for doing the wrong sorting, but just recognizing that we can do our part, but we also need to have professionals whose job it is to sort this stuff. Really nice to see the city sort of assert that in this situation, we will have garbage recycling and organics, and we're going to be consistent everywhere, and you have to follow these rules. And I'm glad that they got MLSE and the FanFest and FIFA and all those people on side. It's great that they got the waste sorting teams and the back end sorting teams. And I did not see a lot of garbage on the ground. So it was a good testament to them doing their job and doing it well. And I'm glad there was work on that. But it also begs the question, like, the number of staff that are needed just to empty those bags. They're just full-time employees just going one station to the next station to the next station. And by the time they get back to that first one, it's full of single-use bottles and cans. If that was reusables,
it would have been so much easier.
It would be so much less. And when people think about how much labor and staff time it costs to manage reusables, they forget how much staff time they're spending cleaning up garbage.
Yeah.
Same person, maybe even less work.
I want to continue talking about these wins because in your report, you've cited some reuse success stories, so to speak. So could you walk us through some of them and what your analysis was?
While we didn't get reuse at FIFA, in order to get this research to show that it's possible, we had to find leading organizations and events that are already doing reuse. So, we didn't get this huge movement-changing event at FIFA, but we still have these leaders and zero waste champions who are moving ahead. Pride Toronto is one example. So the Pride Festival in Toronto is one of the biggest Pride festivals in the world. It goes over multiple days. It has a street festival, lots of events, multiple parades, and big stages with performances and concerts. And at two of those stages, they've had reusable cups. And Pride had these custom branded reusable cups that they got a sponsor to cover the cost of. There's a beautiful values-based messaging consistent with the values of those coming to the Pride event. And they've had those cups. They've been using those at those stages since 2023. Over the time of using those, they've actually managed to reduce their loss rate. The first year they had a 75% return rate. The next year they had an 80% return rate. And the next year they had over a 90% return rate. So they've managed to introduce reusable cups, no deposits in a limited area, and just create recognition that those cups need to come back with some control, engaging staff, better signs, more bins. They've managed to shift the system so now everyone knows those are reusable cups and they stay at the event. They did sort of commit one of those sort of, cardinal sins of reusable systems in that they had this beautiful cup that could be mistaken as a souvenir cup. We know souvenir cups are a real problem. Big events, baseball stadiums, big things. FIFA want to have souvenir cups so people can take them home and remember their event. But that's not real reuse. That's a one-way system. It's a souvenir someone brings home. Maybe they'll wash it. Maybe they'll use it again. Maybe not. What we want is real reuse systems where it stays in. So what's amazing about the Pride thing is even though they chose custom cups that are souvenir-like, they've managed to keep them. At the same time, when I talked to, in our interviews with the Pride organizers who helped bring those cups in, they did say that, if we had chosen a more generic branding or style for our cup, those cups could be used by other festivals throughout the year in Toronto. They recognize after they're like, these cups are sort of sitting in storage for the rest of the year between each event. And there are so many street events and so many street festivals. And wouldn't it be amazing if all of those events could use these cups? So that was a really interesting learning and reflection after they had them for a few years, but people still really love the cups.
It goes to show that while a one-off event like FIFA may or may not immediately bring about some change, it did sort of get people talking, and it began this dialogue among stakeholders. And so this work does have far-reaching consequences. Could you talk to us about some of the changes you're noticing?
One of the great things that's happened is that in all of this ongoing advocacy by T and by other groups to push for reuse at FIFA, it's made this conversation a lot more public. One cool result, I think a result of this is that Live Nation, another gigantic international company that doesn't always get the greatest headlines around ticketing and things like that, but they've actually done some really amazing leadership in Toronto. And they have now adopted reusable cups for all of their shows at their two big outdoor venues for the whole summer. So that's almost 200 shows. They're expecting maybe 2 million visitors. That's the Rogers Stadium, which is a giant 50,000 seat outdoor stadium at the north end of the city. And then the RBC Amphitheater, under 20,000 people, but they have concert every night. And it's just amazing. They did a pilot test last year. They tried it out. They saw that it worked. And now they're just doing it. So while we need policy to bring everybody along to do it, it's also really heartening to see that a big company that has a huge footprint is just getting on with it and introducing thousands of people to reusables, bringing this to our city, and hopefully maybe they'll be the catalyst that FIFA wouldn't be.
Going back to souvenir cups, I agree, it's very heartening. And when organizations like Live Nation are, sort of setting the path out, it becomes easier for other adopters to see and follow. If it makes it easier for anybody else who wants to implement reuse.
And I would say, there are even smaller groups that have been doing this for even longer. Yeah. So you have these tiny little early adopters who are doing their zero waste events. And then, some adventurous groups like Pride that was like, yeah, let's do this. And then a few other bigger and bigger groups doing it. And then Live Nation, huge company, huge footprint in Toronto. This, I think, is a game changer for how it's going to work here. So I'm really excited by that. And we've got people talking about all the other street festivals in the city and all of these other events and how can we cut the waste from those too. So I think it's pretty cool.
Shraddha Kumar speaking with Emily Alfred from the Toronto Environmental Alliance about reuse, waste management and practical lessons emerging from major events in Toronto. Reuse offers a different way of thinking about the problem, not just how to clean up waste more effectively, but how to avoid so much of it in the first place. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Reloop Brief, and remember you can get more episodes, including the previous conversation between Shraddha and Emily, at reloopplatform.org.